Tony Kinnett.
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 Host of the Tony Kinnett Cast.
Let's get down to business.
You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
WCYTV.
Here on the Daily Signal.
Good evening and welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast. It is Tuesday, October 8th, here in the Midwest, out of 93 WIBC in Indianapolis and our other syndicated stations. If you are listening on our syndicated station down in Pensacola, Florida, we ask respectfully that you consider evacuating north of Pensacola to a safer location with Hurricane Milton getting closer and closer. Time is of the essence. Of course, I understand the desire to keep things safe at home, but it would be far better for you to be safe. And then, obviously, we will get to that in just a little bit, talking about some of the recovery and the preparation efforts and, unfortunately, some of the drama there. Up first, we need to have a little bit of a chat about the media blitz no one has asked for. And I want to make this clear. No one, except for maybe the most on their knees before bedtime as a child, just praying up the wishiest of wishes. We're talking like the give me a unicorn and a pony, please wishes. The prayers, the Hail Maryest of prayer throws on Republicans that Kamala Harris would, in some way, shape, or form, make the decision to go on a media tour. And then, in October, in the midst of all kinds of crises for the Harris-Walz campaign, a disastrous vice presidential debate against J.D. Vance from Tim Walz, not to mention the economy worries and the Middle Eastern conflict and the problems at the border and the migration problems here in the United States proper, as well as dealing with a serious issue regarding FEMA and disaster recovery in North Carolina, rural Georgia, and other affected states. The Harris team decided that since they are still basically neck and neck with Trump in almost every single poll, in fact, while Polymarket and some of the betting sites have Trump up, in a lot of the decision desk headquarters type poll analysis firms, they're saying that the election's a 50-50 at this point. That's advantage Trump because Republicans do not poll evenly with Democrats in the presidential general. That's just not a thing that happens. So what does the Harris-Walz team decide to do? Well, they decide what we really need to do is schedule a massive media tour throughout October. Surely this can only go well. And so they set up in very short succession. They get her on 60 Minutes with Bill Whitaker, and Bill Whitaker came to play, boys and girls. It was not the friendly hug, pat, friendly, love and smooch interview that she was hoping for. Then she went on a podcast called Call Me Daddy, in which the host usually talks about the different kinds of sexual positions that she hops onto with random guys. That's not an exaggeration. And yes, you're right. That is kind of gross and a weird move for a presidential candidate to hop on with. But anywho, then she's hopped on The View this morning, and that was just special. We're going to get to that in a second. She hopped on with Howard Stern this afternoon, and we got a clip in just a brief millisecond on that side. And then she will be on with Stephen Colbert. Now, those of you out there, the general normal individuals here in the United States, as you know, I don't usually focus a lot of my coverage on what's going on the inside of cities or broad state coverage or what's going on the coasts. I focus on what I like to believe are actually what the middle class members of the American economy are going through, or the lower income class, or the lower end of the upper income class. Those of us who go and do a job, and then we go home to our families. The normalcy of what many would have considered for a long time the American dream. Those individuals are really, really not warming up to Kamala Harris in these particular interviews because they're terrible. But that didn't stop her from trying to give her spiel about hope and feelings and dreams and about how she's the one that cares. This was her just a few hours ago on Howard Stern, whose radio show is on Sirius XM, which kind of an interesting thing. She goes on and on and on, like all of the platitudes that she can think of out there in the broad, wide world about how she really cares and she really thinks that voters really just wants somebody who loves them and says that they're special. And actually, Donald Trump's a big, stinky meanie pants. Here is Vice President Harris prattling on.
I think that, Howard, people ask me, what do you think is going on and what is the tension here? What's at stake? And there are many things, and I can be much more articulate than what I'm going to say. But ultimately, I do believe that.
I want to point out, she always promises that she can be more articulate. She did this in 60 Minutes. She did this in an earlier interview with someone on MSNBC. She says, I can be more articulate if you want, and then never gets more articulate. But anyway, here's her hopes, dreams, visions, and inspirations.
This is an election that is about strength versus weakness.
Uh-huh.
And weakness as projected by someone who puts himself in front of the American people.
Okay, yeah, that's the move. Okay, yep. Donald Trump is really bad and selfish. Good luck with that. If that's really your big poll, okay. Fantastic stuff. I also want to point this out. This is for all of you out there that may consider running for office, or maybe you're working for a political office. There is not a soul on earth who asks candidates questions like, what do you think is going on? And hey, what's at stake? No one asks candidates that. Get out of here. I've never once been to any kind of a straw poll, a candidate meetup, a political event where someone's like, hey, what do you think's going on? No one does that. Quit that. No one believes you. Get out of here. Okay. Anywho, then we get to a few more clips that have come to light. Number one, that 60 Minutes, in which Kamala Harris was dragged through the mud, rightly so, because Bill Whitaker asked her basic questions. It turns out that 60 Minutes actually edited Kamala Harris' original answer to the question about Netanyahu and Israel, because Kamala Harris' original answer was so bad. And so what happened? Well, the tape leaked, and we've got that here for you. This is some wild stuff.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
Well, Bill, the work that we have done has resulted in a number of movements in that region by Israel that were very much prompted by or a result of many things, including our advocacy for what needs to happen in the region.
But it seems that Prime Minister Netanyahu is not listening.
We're not going to stop pursuing what is necessary for the United States to be clear about where we stand on the need for this war to end.
There you go. A complete word salad. No idea. So they had to edit that down so that you could feasibly draw perhaps a subject, a verb, and maybe a direct object from the dictionary.com flourishment of garbage from the vice president of the country. And by the way, I do want to point out, and perhaps it is important enough to consider that the vice president, when asked about very serious things like, hey, Taiwan seems to be kind of a mess. Does the United States still support the defense of Taiwan? She gets mad about hypotheticals.
So say if China attacks Taiwan, would we use military force to support Taiwan?
Bill, I'm not going to get into hypotheticals, but listen, we need to make sure that we maintain a one China policy.
We need to make sure that we maintain the inspiration of those who came before us unburdened. When I was thinking of the perception of... Oh, such garbage. I do want to point out, by the way, your entire campaign is hypotheticals. If I were president, this is what I would do. If I were a senator, if I were a representative, this is what I would do. The whole thing's... I'm not going to get into hypotheticals with you. Then what are you here for? Well, she doesn't have anything. That's the key issue. The only thing that she's really had going for her so far is kind of running like she wasn't associated with Joe Biden or his extremely unpopular policies over the last couple of years. And then she actually goes on The View and says things that are just so bewilderingly stupid that even CNN was freaking out about it afterward. And actually, CNN frames the clip in its full context. This is pretty wild. And, well, here you go. Here's the election.
I want to get to what Priscilla was talking about, in that one of the questions that Kamala Harris was asked was about how she differentiates herself. Is there any daylight, effectively, between what she would do and what the Biden-Harris administration did? Let's watch part of the answer.
We're obviously two different people, and we have a lot of shared life experiences. For example, the way we feel about our family and our parents and so on. But we're also different people, and I will bring those sensibilities to how I lead.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
Oh!
Molly, what do you make of that?
I'm surprised, frankly, that she doesn't have more to say about this, given that she and her campaign know that this is one of the main questions that voters have.
There you go, ladies and gentlemen. I mean, fantastic. And as if that weren't enough, I should point out clearly that Biden's been doing the same thing. We'll get to that in just a second. But even CNBC's Joe Kernan beat the living crap out of Gina Raimondo, Biden's Commerce Secretary, over this today. It's also just incredible.
So say if China attacks Taiwan.
I think that
I don't think we have it queued up at the particular moment. They're really one of the most fantastic takedowns I have not seen, at least at, I guess, the present time. Biden's Commerce Secretary looks so flustered beyond all reason.
By the way, he was president. We know what that resulted in. Massive deficits.
Seems like you kind of forgot that earlier. Yeah, and the tariffs that he did put on were continued by the Biden administration. There was no recession. Real wages were actually up. Stock market did well. A lot of very positive things happened. Record low unemployment until the pandemic. So it's just weird to act like it's a complete wild card what kind of president he would be when you've got a blueprint right there of what kind of president he would be.
I mean, there you go. Heading into the election, and Kamala Harris, through her media interviews, is reminding everyone she's just like Joe Biden. She has no competent thoughts, nor can she speak articulately in any way, shape, or form. And if you ask her about what she's going to do in any specific way, she says, I'm not going to deal in hypotheticals. We haven't even talked about her gun ownership lie. There's so much to get to, but first and foremost, Biden is just going to gut her like a fish. We'll talk about that up next. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, on nationally syndicated, first on 93 WIBC.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Closing time. Just a couple of points of breaking news that need to be discussed before we dig into what has to be one of the weirder October arguments that I've seen. First of all, according to a statement from the FBI, a man who was arrested entering the country and then released into the country because, of course, was just arrested by the FBI in Oklahoma because he was plotting an ISIS terror attack on Election Day. So there you go. Fantastic that, again, the border policies are just working so well here in the United States of America. Also, this evening, Vice Presidential candidate and governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz, has called for the elimination of the Electoral College during a fundraiser at Gavin Newsom's private residence in Sacramento, California. Andrew Pellish from CNN reports. He said, quote, "I think all of us know the Electoral College needs to go. We need a national popular vote, but that's not the world we live in," end quote. See, just like normal Midwesterns. Yeah, sure, he's a radical progressive and a socialist, but hey. So that's the vice presidential candidate doing his thing. Meanwhile, the vice president decided that what she needed to do, as we are still reeling from the horrible, brutal wreckage that has left still thousands unaccounted for in North Carolina and Georgia, that has destroyed entire communities, that has caused so much loss from Hurricane Helene. Kamala Harris, who was doing fundraisers at the time while Joe Biden was sleeping on a beach in Delaware, decided that she would pick a fight with Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida as he was preparing for the Category 5, now one of the 5 most intense hurricanes recorded in the Atlantic. She's going to pick a fight with Governor DeSantis over that. So there was this, I guess, kind of pseudo statement released by a Kamala Harris campaign surrogate saying that she had tried to get in touch with Ron DeSantis, and DeSantis had not answered her call. So yesterday, she had talked about that a little bit, and it was kind of weird. This is what that original call sounded like.
President, Governor DeSantis, NBC is reporting Governor DeSantis is ignoring your calls on hurricanes, resources, and help. How does that hurt the situation here?
Moments of crisis, if nothing else, should really be the moment that anyone who calls themselves a leader says they're going to put politics aside and put the people first.
Yes. He didn't answer my call because he's being all political, or he's the governor of a state and he is getting ready to be extremely busy dealing with the second hurricane that has ran directly through his state in a month. Again, say what you want about Ron DeSantis, the man is extremely dedicated to governing his state. Florida is an exceptionally well-run state. And I will point out that of the last couple of storms that have gone through under DeSantis administration, power lines are always up there within the first 48 hours. Roads, bridges are rebuilt within a week. He's busy. Also, you're the vice president. You can't have it both ways. You can't be separate from the Biden administration, but also demand people address you as very, very super duper important. She's not the head of FEMA. And by the way, this was Ron DeSantis today slapping back very articulately from the Situation Room in Florida, where, again, he's trying to prepare the state for a major, major disaster incoming.
And we've been laser focused on leveraging all resources available, including from the federal government. And I've been in touch with both FEMA and the president, as well as marshaling all our state agencies and working to support our local communities. And so for Kamala Harris to try to say that my sole focus on the people of Florida is somehow selfish is delusional. She has no role in this. In fact, she's been vice president for 3.5 years. I've dealt with a number of storms under this administration. She has never contributed anything to any of these efforts. And so,
yeah, exactly. It looks like there's a lot to this that's kind of political, because Kamala's trying to make a bid for Florida. She thinks that Florida is in play, and that's, suddenly gonna, I guess, do something for her campaign. It's kind of gross. And if that wasn't bad enough, then, by the way, that had been debunked, because it came out that actually Kamala Harris didn't try to call Ron DeSantis. Someone on her team tried to call an aide on Governor DeSantis's team. And again, he's, busy. And even though that had been common knowledge at this point, that something an aide or a campaign staffer should kind of let the person running for office know, she then doubled down on The View today, which that's certainly a choice one can make.
A conversation. So obviously, this is not an issue that is about partisanship or politics for certain leaders, but maybe is for others.
Grammar of a 2-year-old dyslexic cucumber aside, Kamala Harris, again, still trying to say, oh, well, some people just kind of care about themselves and not the storm at hand. Very bold. And then we remember that President Joe Biden the last couple of weeks has taken several opportunities, both impromptu during a Harris rally, in front of the White House press pool, locked, glued, fastened Kamala Harris to his entire administration, and has done so explicitly and overtly, saying things like, we're singing from the same song sheet. She's been responsible for every decision in my administration. She's the one who signed half of these bills, as she did casting the final vote, the tiebreaker vote in the Senate. That means her signature does, in fact, go on the piece of legislation for the Inflation Reduction Act, which even Biden admits didn't reduce inflation. Biden is getting his sweet revenge for Kamala Harris and Barack Obama and Nancy Pelosi kicking him off of the ticket to run against Donald Trump. And he wants Kamala Harris to lose. The reason he wants Harris to lose is because he's going to be fine either way. It doesn't bother him. He wants his campaign surrogates to go out in front of the country if Trump wins on election day and say, well, we should have just left Biden on the ticket. And by the way, those essays and articles, they're coming. So brace yourself. So Biden gets out in front of the press today and really digs the knife right between Kamala Harris's shoulder blades by claiming DeSantis is doing a phenomenal job, and he's actually kept in close touch with DeSantis preparing for Milton.
Mr. President, the governor of Florida has been cooperative. He said he's gotten all that he needs. I talked to him again yesterday, and I said, no, you're doing a great job. It's all being done well. We thank you for it. And I literally gave my personal phone number to call. So I don't know. There was a rough start in some places, but every governor from Florida to North Carolina has been fully cooperative and supportive and acknowledged what this team is doing.
That's an off-script answer, and I just want to make this clear. I really do love how Biden is again, clearly not like dead, at this point. But he does whip out the sanity, like the very clearly in control of things, whenever he's driving the knife into Kamala Harris' political career. Like whenever he's shivving her campaign, he's like, full sentences, boom, lay it out clearly. Every governor's doing well. I gave DeSantis my personal phone number. Oh, it's great. Something that is a little less than great, though, is the disinformation and stupidity from both the progressive left and some on the populist right. So, first of all, there are those on the progressive left that think that man has created this hurricane due to climate change. Here's Bill Nye, who has taken far fewer meteorology classes than I have, and I know I've seen the transcripts, basically talking about how we need to vote for Kamala Harris so hurricanes don't happen anymore.
The other side, as we often call it, has no plans to address climate change, no plans for long-term dealing with these sorts of problems. If you have young voters out there, encourage them to vote. People say, what can I do about climate change? If we were talking about it, associating it with big storms like this, that would be really good. But
oh, yeah. Just say, hey, climate change. This storm's because of climate change. No, that's not true. That's not true. These kind of storms have occurred since we've started measuring hurricanes and their prominence over the last 100 to 150 years. And by the way, and again, for those on the right that have also said, well, this is actually government controlled and you can see patents where they're using sound waves to aggravate the water. That is not how weather works. It's not how weather works. I swear, some of the conspiracy theories that are popping up because people want to believe there's some secret Jewish cabal that's like controlling the world. Some of these insane, it's very easy to believe in some of these stupid conspiracy theories when you don't know how anything works. We have no technology that can heat up vast swaths of the atmosphere at once. That's not at all how any of this functions. I remind you that Trump was just in office. Trump has no ability to keep secrets whatsoever. We've never been able to control the weather. Oh my goodness gracious, stop. Oh, but isn't it crazy how there's a lithium mine? You know what? The private owners of said land near Chimney Rock in North Carolina are retaining ownership of the land. FEMA's not buying up land from anyone. By the way, that didn't happen in Maui either. The reason that the federal government was terrible in Maui and Hawaii is because the federal government sucks. FEMA sucks. It's a bad organization run by stupid people more concerned with equity than disaster recovery. It's not some super secret Bill Gates scheme to sell parts of Oprah. Just stop it. Stop it. I can point at the Biden administration and say, look, they're stupid, they're incompetent. He's asleep on a beach in Delaware. Not the government using radio waves to control the thunderstorm. Not, you sound as crazy as the climate change morons. Stop it. We have an election to win. There's things going on. Don't waste our time with nonsense. Humans believing that humans can control the weather with any kind of accuracy. And by the way, yes, I know about rain seeding in Dubai that works like 1 time out of 30. Is like one of the most classic forms of idolatry in human history. If we sacrifice this child, we'll control the weather. Oh, I have to kill my political opponent. He's controlling the weather. Nonsense. Well, up next, we're going to talk about something humans can control and the fantasies surrounding it. We're going to talk about AI a little bit with Nick Dwork. Stick around. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated.
16,000.
This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Good evening and welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated. It's good to be with you in the flesh, and by that I mean I'm not a generation of AI, no matter who tells you that I'm like the Temu version of J.D. Vance. That's not true. Quit listening to those people. And to prove it, to talk a little bit more about AI, is Nick Dwork. He's an assistant professor over from the University at Colorado. Now, there's a lot of stuff that goes into AI. We're not going to get into all of it, but do you prefer Nicholas or Nick? Which is better for you?
Please call me Nick.
All right, so Nick, tell us where we are with AI, because some people have started to assume that we're kind of hitting a bit of a plateau. Like there was this big rush as to what it could do, and then it's kind of leveling off. Is that true, or is there still a lot of work to be done?
Oh, there's a ton of work to be done, of course. I think, where are we with AI? I would say that we have come to realize some of AI's limitations, and I don't think we know yet how to get beyond the current limitations. So we have achieved things like 90% success rate for some interesting problems, computers that can write paragraphs that are mostly right, these sorts of things. And I don't think we yet know how to go beyond that.
Do you think that one of the reasons that we can't really move beyond some of those barriers is because people are expecting kind of human levels, or maybe even human elements of creativity to be learned somehow, and maybe we're finding trouble with a machine learning what may not be a learnable attribute?
I suspect you're absolutely right. I think that machine learning, these algorithms that we're creating that are called AI, tend to learn patterns. So you give it some sort of input and it generates an output. And if you have a lot of data where it can learn these sort of input and output relationships, then it can sort of mimic those same patterns. So what's an example? You could give an AI a zip code, a square footage of a house, the color of the house, the street it's on, etc., and then its current price. And from a lot of data like that, it could start to learn how to price out new properties that it hasn't seen before. But look, teaching a computer to become creative, I think, is a whole other thing. And aside from having computers do interesting things sort of randomly, I don't think we're there yet.
Good evening.
Machine learning, these algorithms that we're creating that are called AI, tend to learn patterns. So you give it some sort of input and it generates an output. And if you have a lot of data where it can learn these sort of input and output relationships, then it can sort of mimic those same patterns. So what's an example? You could give an AI a zip code, a square footage of a house, the color of the house, the street it's on, etc., and then its current price. And from a lot of data like that, it could start to learn how to price out new properties that it hasn't seen before. But look, teaching a computer to become creative, I think, is a whole other thing. And aside from having computers do interesting things sort of randomly, I don't think we're there yet.
I wonder if that's, so there are ceilings where you get to points where it may not be possible for a computer to artificially learn some things that perhaps it's not possible to program, perhaps out of the realm of human development. And the reason that I point this out is that from the education perspective, we had something called Bloom's taxonomy. And for a long time before hyper-progressives ruined education philosophy, Bloom's taxonomy was the idea that at the very basic part of education, you should have remembering and kind of mimicry, where you tell me something, and then I remember it, and then I may be able to regurgitate it back to you. One step up from that is to be able to understand it, to understand what it is that you're telling me, and then to be able to apply it, and then to analyze it, and then to evaluate it, and then finally the very top, the peak, the pinnacle of the great pyramid of learning is synthesis, which is where I can take all of the cool things from your work out in Colorado, and I can create something brand new. It may have elements of your stuff, but it's new, and there is a human element of creativity. And when I hear people talk about how AI is going to be used to do all of this strange, like Dr. Doofenshmirtz level of evil. I mean, because they're like, oh, super evil. It's like somewhere between Bond villain and Dr. Doofenshmirtz. It's quite ridiculous. We still haven't actually seen AI do anything anywhere close to the...
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
HAL 9000 kind of a thing. And I don't know. I just feel like whenever I hear those concerns, that's kind of misplaced as to where our focus should be regarding AI.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of fun to imagine the possibilities of what we could create as humans. I also think it's like our own egotism is saying that, it'll be during our generation that technology finally springs to life and becomes sentient in some way.
Like skipping to the space age kind of a thing?
Right.
Born too late to settle the West, born too early to settle the stars, born at the right time to browse memes on Twitter. Like that's just kind of the rough aspect there. So where do you think AI should be focusing? I know, again, that's a huge question for a guy in your field to ask, and we're on with Assistant Professor Nick Dwork out from Colorado, brilliant mind on AI. Where would be maybe a place or two we could really start putting focus in to get some good out of AI right now and not some wild fantasy?
If you don't mind, I'd like to tell you about one of my most recent inventions. So I've invented something called enforced data consistency, where we can ensure AI is much more accurate for some important problems. And this is crucial for medical technologies where I work. So for example, AI is currently being used to make MRI images, to make medical images from the data that is collected from the medical imaging machines. But it can do really terrible things. It can put a tumor where there isn't one, or it can remove a tumor where there actually is one. And you can imagine that these have, terrible consequences for the patient.
The worst consequences.
Sorry?
Said the worst consequences, agreeing with you.
Of course, right, yeah. So, we've invented a way, my student, Alec McManus, I'd like to really praise him for his work. We've invented a way to prevent it from doing that nearly to the degree that it currently does, which would be much, much better for the patients. I think this is sort of a springboard of a whole platform of technologies that could be, very useful. Right now, like I said, AI is about 80 or 90%. And for example, Wendy's is testing putting AI in their drive-through. So instead of speaking to a person, you're going to be talking to an AI system.
Unless you try to order 10,000, unless you try to order 10,000 hamburgers, then it kicks you over to a real person.
Yeah, right. Or even without 10,000, if you just try to order a hamburger about 1 out of 5, 1 out of 10 times, it kicks you over to a real person. That's about where we're at. And I think if we're going to be using AI for mission critical technologies like medicine, for example, we really want to focus on making sure that it doesn't do anything terrible. Just going back to the old adage, do no harm.
Right. So if we're going to take a look at redundancy technology, because that's what this is, right? There's an old joke in the corporate world that Microsoft Excel, the spreadsheet software, will take any number that you put in its program, and the software will think you're putting in a date. Or you'll try to put in a date and it'll think you're putting in a currency. And there's just that kind of inside joke among kind of the office sector of the country who's used Excel since the late 90s that understands that point. And the reason I'm making this point is that as they have developed Microsoft Office further, they have incorporated finally a little bit of redundancy tools and software that are second guessing what has long been a burden, at least an inconvenience of the platform. I've often said that AI is basically the same revolution to the corporate industry that Microsoft Office was to the corporate industry in the 90s. So that now when you look at where we are, redundancy makes a lot of sense to be pointing our attention to because, AI can do some really amazing things 3 out of 5 times. And I sure hope that this isn't one of those times you got to roll the dice and you really need it to be one of the 3 out of 5, because if it's not, you're up a creek. I mean, I've been in that position. I was making, a joke online, and I was like, I need this AI generative software to produce the right kind of image. And then it just goes horribly wrong. And, I don't have time to sit here and reprompt it 13 times. I mean, redundancy software seems like a natural step in the stage of, what would this be at this point? The medium, the field?
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of people are thinking about that, and I think it's a good way to think about it. I also think, when people start thinking that AI is this, it's sort of a misnomer to call it intelligence. Even when they start thinking that it's in these exaggerated thoughts, I'm often amused when I sort of show people what AI actually is. It's very rudimentary. It's simply multiplications with additions, with maybe some trigonometric functions.
Right.
And it's very hacky. We spend a lot of time turning knobs, getting these things to sort of work even as well as it currently does. There are lots and lots of knobs. They're called hyperparameters because that makes it sound fancier. I think people would be very surprised if they understood what it actually was and then compared it to this vision of what, the hyperbole that's being spouted now.
To catch the rest of my AI not generated interview with Nicholas Dwork, you're going to need to head over to the Daily Signal's YouTube page, and there's some great stuff at the end of this one. We'll be back in just a second. Don't go anywhere. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC.
1 in 6.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
So, tomorrow there will not be at least tomorrow I won't be hosting the show. Jerry Lopez, Indy Spanglish over on X, he'll be guest hosting because I will be heading up to Wisconsin, obviously a major swing state in this particular election. My alma mater, Maranatha Baptist University in Watertown, has invited me up to address the staff and the student body. And so I will be up there. We'll be actually doing the Thursday show from Wisconsin, talking a little bit about things on the ground there. And to touch back on a little bit of news that we were able to share at the beginning of the show, Tim Walz has now openly called for the Electoral College to be abolished. And I want to point something out just real quick here. You can tell that a campaign feels confident about their chances on Election Day when less than a month before that election, they call for the abolition of the Electoral College. That's... Oh, man, it's fantastic. I mean, really. So the question that follows is, well, wait a minute, I thought that right now all of the polls show that they're still neck and neck, that Kamala might be gaming in just like one or two swing states, or that she has a slight national edge over Trump. So what's the deal? A lot of this comes down to what is called poll delay. Poll delay is the time between when a national event, scandal, something that shifts the electorate occurs, and when people are polled on it. Now, again, because polling is different from likely voter to registered voter data sets, there are a couple of factors that play into it. When you are considering Trump's very successful rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, the vice presidential debate, and the hurricane disasters that are not looking good for Kamala Harris because she is directly, inadvertently, explicitly making it about herself at the expense of anyone who gets in her way. How is that going to affect her campaign? Well, the real answers are we don't know. Because of early voting and because of a kind of a time delay that can be anywhere between a couple of days to a couple of weeks based on how long these voting stretches are out. Some places like Emerson polling actually has like a 2 or 3 week span where they start and end a poll. A lot happens, and it kind of skews data into a general feeling from a point to point based on big news. So we may not actually have some of the effects of these really critical events that are going on in October, these October surprises as they're called, until we get to early November. And I tell you what, if the Harris-Walz campaign is acting like this right now, it is definitely not a shoo-in. We're going to talk more about it this week. We'll see you on Thursday from Wisconsin. Jerry Lopez will be in tomorrow. This has been the Tony Kinnett Cast on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated and first on 93 WIBC.
Hi, this is Denny Smith. And how